Hi everyone, and welcome to today's 30 minutes webinar here. Today we'll be dissecting three of the common challenges that we often see the procurement, TPRM and GRC teams deal with in the financial sector. The first challenge that we'll try to dissect is they're often having a very wide organization with a lot of buying requests that the procurement team can struggle to deal with in a quick and a compliant way. The second challenge that they might be having is a plethora of point solutions for gathering risk data and dealing with risk mitigations, and they're all siloed away in different departments and different workflows, making it quite difficult to coordinate and create an overview of these things. And then the evergreen problem and the burden of compliance and regulatory demands. When there's no single source of truth, it is a very manual and a time-consuming and a risky business. I'm CJ, I'm an account executive here at Touchstone Spend Management, TSM, and for the past 20 plus years, we've been helping companies to meet their procurement and compliance challenges through technologies and processes. We consult, we resell, we implement, and we support. In a second, I'll be handing over to Charlie that will shortly elaborate on these challenges. And the last 25 minutes of this session will be Sishan, our solutions consultant, demoing how Ivalua can help to meet these challenges. So, Charlie? And you got to unmute yourself as well. The age of Zoom.
Cool. Hello, thank you, everyone. So, yeah, as CJ alluded to, so I talk to a lot of organisations in financial services who I think I say have relatively mature procurement and third-party risk teams, but often from a technology point of view, they're still pretty greenfield. So they'll have a lot of risk processes around third parties, but when it comes to increasing regulatory demands, a lot of the way they're trying to deal with it is inefficient and manual. So you can see these spreadsheets that they have that are absolute works of art, but with the regulations coming in, things like DORA, which I'm sure everyone here knows a lot about, the pressure on those organisations and their processes is only getting more and more. So what many firms are looking for now is technology that can actually genuinely help them. So something that's going to keep the business safe and something which supports compliance efforts, but doesn't necessarily get in the way of the business or slow users down. And that's where we see Ivalua as a particularly strong fit. So what we're going to do today is go through three use cases where we see Ivalua as particularly relevant for financial services. So number one, capturing business requirements clearly and consistently. So firms I talk to tend to have a decentralized procurement model. So most people in the business don't really want to spend time in a system. They just want a simple way to raise a request for a service. They don't want to understand procurement taxonomy or the regulatory classifications. It's just not interesting to them. So the intake process in Ivalua gives them a clean, structured way to submit what they need while automatically routing the right information into procurement and third-party risk. So it keeps them compliant without slowing them down. So we're going to have a look at how we capture that requirement, making it easy for the user and let the platform handle the complexity that's going on in the background. Number two, financial services, heavily, tightly regulated, and rightly so. So firms need consistent due diligence, ongoing monitoring, clear evidence of how risks are being mitigated. So to do this, a lot of firms will use external data from FSQS, updates, financial data providers, sustainability data, InfoSec, and I'll use companies for bank detail validation. What you can often get in that situation is you're having to log into 4 or 5 different systems to check your third parties are compliant. And in some cases, you're, again, updating that monster spreadsheet, which is both a massive pain and a massive risk to the business. So with Ivalua, all of that information that you're collating from third parties feeds into our risk center. So we can give you one place to surface that information and give you that single view of suppliers and sub-tier relationships, which is really important. And we're going to look at how this works and how clients can use that and also reconfigure it as regulations evolved. And then finally, we're going to have a look at contracts, outsourcing register and reporting. So almost every organisation needs a controlled, reportable register of contracts and outsourcing agreements. And this is particularly the case in financial services. So you're going to need to get to grips with key metadata, classifications, dependencies, regulatory flags. All of that you're going to need to report to the regulator, which is a massive job. People can spend all day on this, a week or month in some cases. So with Ivalua, we've got that data model which can capture all of the information. We have built a standardized configuration for DORA, which we'll have a look at, but the platform gives you that flexibility to support whatever comes next. So that's one of the main reasons why people in sectors where you have a lot of supply chain regulations select Ivalua. So that's what we're going to have a look at today. It's a platform that can adapt when the rules change. So that's enough context. I think we're going to have a look at how this all looks in the system now. So Zishan, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Charlie and CJ. Let me just start sharing my screen. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. So I've got it in a different order to what Charlie has actually shown you. So I'm gonna actually go through risk and just a supplier record to start with, just to show you what sort of information we actually capture on a supplier record before I actually show you the intake process. So hopefully it should be okay. So in terms of a risk manager or somebody who's actually managing a supply in the system, I could just, on my homepage, I could look at it from a risk as well as performance point of view, where I am with my, supplies that I'm managing as a supply manager. And you can see that by just looking at this graph, I can see that these particular supplies, they're not really doing very well in terms of the, risk. The risk score is high, as well as the performance score is in that sort of category where they're not doing very well in the performance. So you ought to be looking at replacing these supplies. So all of this is drillable. You can just right click, access the data, risk data behind that, or just access the supplier record from here as well. Okay. Now, in terms of, if we look at just the supply in the system, this risk and performance information is also very visible wherever you see these supplies in any of the modules. So for example, if you were engaging with the supply in sourcing module or in contracting module, you have that visibility of where they are with their risk, basically. Yeah. So you can make a right decision whether to actually spend with them or have a contract with them or not. You can have all of those KPIs there. And if I just open up one supplier record, Dell Inc., which is my example supply, you'll see that all of the information is also on my homepage, suppliers homepage, we call it. We know they are a fully registered supplier because they went through all of this registration process, and I'll show you how this works in the intake process as well. But again, risk in terms of what we've actually qualified them based on documentation they provided. So you can see key documentation we're maintaining against the supply, and the supplier can actually provide those documentation through the portal. They can just self-service, and the system will automatically send you right alerts on time. And the key is risk. Obviously, in any organization, when you're actually managing that supply, the risk is not just assessed at the time of onboarding the supply. Like Charlie said, you have to, ongoing basically risk assessment is needed, okay? And you need to be able to actually have a system which can actually monitor that risk and also prompt you when there is a risk identified. Now, in terms of risk categories, you can correlate with some of these categories. Most people would have a financial risk, a security, operational, and so on and so forth. And what Ivalua allows you to do in the system is you can actually assign weightages. So kind of tailor it based on what your risk appetite is in your organization. Okay. So for example, financial risk might have more weightage than the other categories in your organization. Okay, and we can tailor that. We can even tailor the weightage on individual key criteria as well. And all of these are very visually, displayed because you can see the trend. So you can see their credit risk is actually worsening. Okay, it's not improving based on the historical data that we have in the system. If you look at this one, this indicator is basically saying that there's a risk identified, but it's a new risk that's been identified, and it's actually a low risk, but nevertheless it's a new risk that we identified. And the way we collect this information is from different sources. Now, one of the sources could be a third-party risk provider. I mean, many people use, DNB, Integrity Next. There's a few other out there that you can actually connect Ivalua, and that information can come directly from them. And we can also monitor it. So what this means is if there's an alert, you'll see this. I've got in my demo system, I've got a risk method, which is one of the risk providers. And you can see there's an alert raised in their system, and I can easily see that there's an issue. And if I want to look at it, I can even click on that, or I can go and look at that dashboard that is actually going to come directly from what we call is from risk methods. So you can see there's an event from risk methods, and if I want to look at more detail, I can click on this, and it will take me directly to the dashboard from the risk third-party provider. So that's one way. The other way is if you don't have a third-party risk provider at the moment, which is fine. You could also have, generally people would have a scoring questionnaire set up in the system. And that scoring questionnaire can actually then define a score, and which can then actually bring this to life as well, this scorecard. Okay. And obviously you can override this risk scorecard and everything you can do. So that's how you can actually keep monitoring the risk against the supplier, and the system can automatically send those questionnaires out to the relevant stakeholders to actually reassess the risk based on the segmentation of the supplier. Okay, so that's how we can do this. There are other things, like the sub-tier. You can even look at the risk against your sub-tier network. What this is, not just the risk that you're looking at against a particular supplier, but also a subcontractor and subcontractor. And sometimes it is very important as well that you look at where you are with those as well. And this can also be presented onto the risk scorecard as well. You can see not only the child risk is identified, as well as the risk against the sub-tier network is also identified as well. So you can make a right decision when you're onboarding them. And Ivalua have a own onboarding process, but I'll just go through an intake process, the second use case that we had. So the second use case is how do we onboard these suppliers and then monitor their risk, okay? And as a end user, you could create a request, not just to request a new supply, it could be request to buy something, request to have a contract in place, okay, or a request to actually have a sourcing done. So Ivalua, you can create those, and you can actually monitor them onto your dashboard as well. Okay, how long it's taken for an average intake to be processed, for example, what are the different types of intakes I'm actually creating, and the percentage and rate. So all of that can be monitored. But if I go into a browse intake, you'll see these are the different intakes I've submitted. Okay, I've submitted something to buy, which is like I may need a laptop or an iPad, for example. I've also engaged a request to actually have a new supplier set up as well. I've got one where I've asked a contract to be set up as well as a sourcing event. And on the right, you can see all of the steps that this intake will take. And as an intake requester, you don't need to know what's happening on the other modules. All you need to know is where you are with that process, for example. So if, let's say, look at one that I've already submitted, which is this one. If I just open this up in another window, you'll see that this intake was very simple, where I just said, okay, I want to create a new supply. This is the title I had given it. Some of the information is pre-filled in based on my information. And then what I did was I said, okay, who do I want to set up? TSM Consulting, main contact details. You can see I filled that in if I know them. And then all I've done is I submitted this. What it did was it went through an initial intake authorization process. So, like, I mean, it may go to my line manager if needed, if it's a request to actually buy something maybe. But in this request, normally we go to a procurement department, and the procurement department can then make a decision whether we want to start onboarding this supplier, or maybe there's already a supplier in the system that we should be using. Okay, so they can reject their back, or they can actually start the intake process. So you can see full history on the right, who did, when they did it, all of that was done, and you have a full history behind that. And that history can also be looked at in the summary, in the logs. You know, all of that is recorded, as well as any notifications that were sent to relevant stakeholders. But it's very clear from here that when you start the registration process, it will go through an enrollment preps. It might go through a risk assessment, okay, because not every supplier would need to go through a risk assessment. Like, for example, you may now want to do a risk assessment against a corner shop or a flower shop that you may have set up in the system, okay? And then only when you've done all the due diligence, then the supplier is activated. And the key is the requester can actually look at all of the information just from one intake. So if I look at, let's say, a supply which was being onboarded, the supply, I can just quickly drill into that supply, and you can see, I can see this was a supply. The status is an active supply because it went through this whole onboarding workflow where all the documentation was checked, the bank details were actually verified by AP. Then we had risk assessment done, okay, any due diligence, and only after that we had an activation of the supply record. On the right, we can see all of the processes that went through and who approved them in there as well. Okay, so all of that can be looked at when we're going through that. And there are other things I wanted to just show you just very quickly. When you're doing when you are actually doing onboarding, you can also send questionnaires, okay, out to suppliers to actually fill them in if needed. You can even ask them to fill in certain conflict of interest questions. You know, I haven't got any, but we can set up conflict of interest questions as well, which whoever's actually submitting this intake, they can fill that in to make sure that there is no conflict of interest if they go with, for example, with the supplier. Okay, so all of that is nicely done through an intake process, which can also be used for other things. So, for example, if I show you another example, which is where I want to buy something, let's say, if I look at this, you'll see it's got a different process because you are actually creating a request to buy a laptop. You don't know where you're going to buy it from. Once you've actually submitted this, once you've had a triage of that through a workflow, it will then create a requisition which can go to your buying department. They might do an RFX process, 3 codes. Then they might create a purchase order. There might be a receipt created, you know, and then an invoice. But as an end user, you have complete visibility of all the objects. So if I want to look at if an invoice was registered, has it been paid, you know, what the status of the invoice is, I can just simply click on that and the system can actually show me that invoice and I can see what the status is. Now, not only I can look at those objects, I can also, so let's look at this. So this is okay to pay invoice already. You can see it went through a workflow. I have full visibility of that. It's not been paid yet, but it is okay to pay. And what you can do is from just this console, you can even initiate questions. So you can send a message to whoever's, processing that. You know, if, for example, if it's with the buyer and they're just doing RFX, you can send them a message saying, "Can you expedite that? I need it by that date." So all of that information can be done through the intake process. So that was, in a nutshell, an intake process. Next, I want to show you is contracts and how we can use contract DORA Add-On that we have, which is a requirement for most financial organizations who have a footprint in Europe, and some even in UK do follow it. So in terms of contracting, you can see I'm logged in as somebody who's a contract manager, and their homepage is slightly different to what you've seen before. So I'm only looking at, contracts that are, the key contracts that I'm managing, maybe a few KPIs. I even have my contracts homepage, where I can see all of these KPIs very quickly as a contract manager. But what I also have is I have a DORA register, which the system automatically maintained. And when you actually creating the contract, you can actually fill in that information. So for example, if I go into this contract, which is telling me that is under the DORA regulation, okay, because I'll show you how we can do this, because the system can automatically identify the contracts that need to be actually DORA compliant. And if we look at, because this contract is for DORA compliant, I can see that some of the information I need to fill in. You might be familiar with these fields. Ivalua have actually worked with industry experts to come up with these fields that you need to actually create the DORA register. So you can fill in those fields. If those fields aren't filled in, what the system does is it highlights those issues on the DORA issues tab. So for example, it's telling you that there are missing definitions that you haven't put onto that. So there's no impact functions that you've defined against. It's a warning, or maybe it's a blocking alert that you haven't actually put in cost of the contract against this contract. So you can easily fix them by clicking on these links. And once you fix that, all you need to do is create that DORA register, which, if I look at this, is based on the DORA requirement. You have to actually submit this in these weird CSV files. Trust me, this is how the regulators want it in, and Ivalua can actually create that, and you can set up how it actually defines it. So, for example, you can define maybe only the legal entities that are in Europe do need to be compliant. So you can say, okay, these legal entities would need to be tracked, and it could be that only these categories, because it's only IT services. So you can define your IT services, and maybe for these functions we need to track, and that's it. And the system will automatically know which ones to actually track, and it will actually create that DORA register for you easily. So this was the sort of information we were going to go through. Okay, if there are no questions, we definitely will be sharing this recording as well as the pack that CJ and Charlie went through. If you have any questions even after that, feel free to send that to Charlie and CJ, and we'll hopefully answer that. We'll come back, and we'll also publish this video online as well on our YouTube channel. So with this, I'd like to thank everyone who's joined. Hope this was useful to go through, and looking forward to seeing you in the next couple of ones that we're going to do in the new year.
All right, perfect. Thank you very much, Sishan, and thank you very much all of you who have attended today. That will be it for us.
Okay. Have a good day.
Thanks a lot, everyone. Cheers. Bye.